So welcome this morning. I have been across the country and back. I felt the need to travel, even though we have been in a shelter in place during this pandemic to support my sister during a challenging time for her. She's okay, but she needed some sister support. And so I got back yesterday and I'm self-quarantining. So I'm broadcasting to you from my home here in Live Oak. While the rest of our crew is at the center, making sure that all of the broadcast goes without a hitch. And for the month of August, we are talking about inclusion in action. I want to thank Susan for her beautiful job last week, Susan Springfield, for her beautiful job last week in doing her talk. It was wonderful and creative, and I really appreciate how she expressed herself so authentically through both her words and her video expertise. It was beautiful. Today, our talk topic is who are we as a movement, as individuals, and as global citizens. And so when we look at this idea of inclusion, I thought we should look at exactly what that means in the context of what we're talking about. And then I want to frame it from a science of mind point of view through some wisdom of Tracy Brown, St. Francis, and Howard Thurman. How about that for a lineup? So what do we mean by inclusion? I found this definition in the workplace and in the social sector. Inclusion, separately from diversity, means that it is the achievement of an environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully, having equal access to opportunities and resources, and can contribute fully to the organization's success. The principle of inclusion takes diversity to a new level where not only do we appreciate and honor the differences, but we experience in our relationships, in both our work and our personal lives, but that we're actually curious and open to what gifts are being brought forth by the differences in diversity. It's more than making room at the table for differences. It's cultivating a curiosity and being willing to create equal space for those differences and learning how to work together through our differences. Yet when I think back to when my children were little and they would watch Sesame Street, I think about that little song that they used to play on Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. And I think that it's indicative, that little song, that little piece of our culture is indicative of this cultural conditioning that we've done, that differences and is not okay, that it makes us uncomfortable, that it requires a lot of work to make space for differences. It's part of our conditioning, and yet it's part of our nature to want to belong. And belonging, I think, has meant sameness. I think that in order for us to really feel like we belong, we look for how we are the same as opposed to how we're different. And so we tend to carte blanche dismiss differences. And so therein lies the rub when we look at this idea of inclusion, and yet we're conditioned to believe that sameness and belonging are really the comfort level of how we relate to one another in our workplace, in our relationships. We feel more comfortable when we're with people who are like us. It's an interesting juxtaposition when we look at this idea of inclusion and diversity and we begin to try to apply it. in the context of our teaching, which is a teaching of oneness. So how does this fit in with our philosophy? Well, I want to introduce you to some wisdom by Tracy Brown. She's a practitioner in our movement, and she's been a leader in the diversity and inclusion network for quite a while. She does some amazing work through not only her leadership in our organization, but through the classes and workshops she teaches. She has a Facebook group called What's Mine to Do, which is all about looking at how we can be more inclusive in our relationships with each other and how we can really stand up to those behaviors and conditioning that does keep us separate, that does tend to spark the fire under things like racism and hatred and violence. And so the work that she's doing is really stunning. And she wrote this book called Stained Glass Spirit. And I want to read a little passage from the part of the book where she begins to reference our vision as Centers for Spiritual Living of a world that works for everyone in context with this idea of inclusion. She asks the question, have you heard your spiritually grounded friends or relatives or church members say things like, I don't like politics. It's mean, unfair, and not in alignment with my spiritual principles. You can't trust any of the politicians or even the media. It's a mess. I'll just ignore politics and focus on love. Perhaps you've heard this one. Let's not talk about racism. It's sad and embarrassing. And besides, we're all just one race, the human race. And then finally, all that talk about race and Black Lives Matters just divides us. Besides, it doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm not a racist. I just hold a vision for peace. Now, what's interesting to me is that Tracy wrote this book sometime around 2017, 2018, and yet all of this was true then, and it's even more true now. We're all facing these ideas, and there's a lot going on in our society around the pandemic, around racism, around politics, and it all feels very divisive. But Tracy goes on to say that these are examples of spiritual bypass at work. Using spiritual principles to escape the world is not what we're called to do. Our spiritual principles and practices are designed to keep us connected to our divinity while we navigate the human experience. So, I think there's this idea that we have that we are supposed to somehow rise above the human experience. And yet the only way that God and divinity can really express itself is by means of you and me. And so we have this opportunity to embrace what's come up and to find out what it is that is ours to do to express God in its fullest through our human form, not to erase it, not to turn away from the messiness, but to lean in and to really find a place within ourselves where we can see God before us. Not because it looks like us, not because it's the same, but because it's God, and God has an amazing amount of diversity. Diversity is an inherent truth. It's the way of life. The biodiversity in the plant and environmental schema is the more diversity you have, the healthier the landscape. And that's true of the human landscape as well. She goes on to say that, or ask again the question, she likes to ask questions, and I think they're powerful questions. She goes on to say, when did we forget that what is happening anywhere is what is happening everywhere? And it's actually impossible to separate ourselves from pain, confusion, anger, fear, disparities, hatred, and violence that is so prevalent in our world today. Certainly, you've heard there's no spot where God is not. God is just as ready to be revealed in the messy parts of human life as in the serene parts of human life. God is in the entire range of experiences. And when we begin to pick and choose what we call spiritual, what we call good, what we call bad, when we use those judgments, we tend to put a wall up between us and what it is that wants to be known by means of us. Like I need to stay curious. And I think that when we look at this idea of inclusion, it requires a deep curiosity, a deep questioning, so that we can have our perspective broadened, so that we can see the bigger picture. Tracy goes on to say that we are meant to be an agent for positive change. We're meant to be agents of positive change. So if you've been around this philosophy for any period of time, you know that we are indeed change agents. That's what spiritual mind treatment and affirmative prayer is all about. It's about stepping into possibility. It's what we say in our centering statement, that we believe in the power of possibility, that we are using this philosophy to create positive change. We've been doing this for over 100 years. We've been doing this, you go to a practitioner because you want to reveal greater health. You go to a practitioner and you use spiritual mind treatment and affirmative prayer because you want to have an experience of greater wealth. You want to have whole relationships. You want to feel like you belong in the world. You want to have right livelihood. We've been affecting positive change for 100 years. That's not changed. When we begin to look at the divisiveness that we're experiencing out there, that's because we've got some kind of misalignment within ourselves. And so it's ours to begin to stand firm in this idea of wholeness, even when we see a world that doesn't seem to be demonstrating wholeness, so that we can be the change that we're calling forward. It's a powerful calling. And so as we begin to look at ourselves, as we begin to look at the things that are really challenging us and triggering us and pushing our buttons, this is an opportunity for us to lean in and to bring the light of this philosophy into the shadow of the self. Into the shadow of the self. And it is the shadow work, which is simply leaning in, inquiring, and seeking a greater truth. Not to whitewash it, not to push it away, but to find out where it lives in us and to get clear on how we can let go of it. We can untangle whatever Gordian knot we've created in our own consciousness, and we can get clearer about our oneness. So back to Tracy's beautiful words in this book, she says, when did we forget that God does things for us by working through us? If those of us who have deep spiritual awareness refuse to be used as agents for transformation, then the opportunity to awaken humanity is left in the hands and hearts of those with limited belief in the power of love, joy, peace, harmony, and wholeness to reveal itself as the true nature of life. Those are powerful words. We are the people we've been waiting for, right? That wonderful Hopi poem. It's up to us to lean in and to begin to see those places where we don't feel like it's in alignment with our highest principle, and to call them in so that they can be healed. And so she goes on to say, we can put our heads in the sand like an ostrich and pretend hatred and disrespect are not happening because we refuse to look at it. We can put our thumbs in our ears, wiggle our fingers, close our eyes, and sing, I can't hear you. But that doesn't mean that the very loud noise of hatred, violence, protest, and politics isn't happening. The foundational beliefs of New Thought in general and Science of Mind specifically call us to apply spiritual principles in all aspects of life. And actually, many of us do that in most parts of our lives. But for some reason, we get triggered with politics and other highly charged topics, and run away from our responsibility to show up as examples of spiritually grounded light right in the middle of what appears to be darkness. She goes on to say, what I don't need to read her words, but I can tell you right here that each one of us, by the very nature of the conflict that we see out in the world, each one of us is being called forth to be a change agent for positive change. And that we cannot be a change agent if we put our heads in the sand, that we need to be active, that we need to be aware, that we need to be willing to keep our hearts and our minds open and be curious about what's being called forth, that the very nature of the conflict is the invitation for your ability to weed out where any of that lives within us and to stand firm in principle, the principles of love, the principles of inclusion, the principles of joy and beauty and freedom. All those things live in they live forever. They can't be diminished. They are attributes of the divine, and they live within each one of us, and they await our willingness to call them forward, to draw them out, and to stand firm in them. So many of us, as religious scientists, have heard Dr. Holmes's, clarion call that we are for something and against nothing. So how can we be anti-racist, or how can we be stand for behavior that is unacceptable and that doesn't seem to be in principle, and be for something and against nothing? This is our growing edge. This is the place where we begin to feel the tension, and where we will begin to tease out a greater good by actually looking at those places and being clear about what we stand for, and being clear about what we won't accept. Not because we're against it, but because the truth that we stand for is so clear and is so powerful that when we stand up, when we look it clearly in the eye, when we face hatred, when we face divisiveness, that it dissolves from the power of love that we carry in our heart and that we carry in our souls, that is longing to be expressed by each one of us. We have a powerful global vision, and what I'm noticing about this global vision is that it's so powerful that it is creating a lot of attention for the things that don't reflect this powerful global vision of a world that works for all. And so we are seeing in the world all the things that are looking to be healed, so that we can realize this beautiful vision of a world that works for all. I think it's time for us to really walk the talk, to really stand up for the principles that we say we believe in. And there's this great quote, you might have heard it from, it's actually more like a prayer, and it's by Howard Thurman, and it says, it's called "Keep Fresh Before Me the Moments of My High Resolve," and I'd like to read a piece of it to you. There was no intent to betray what seemed so sure at the time. My response was whole, clean, authentic, but little by little, there crept into my life the dust and grit of the journey. Details, lower level demands, all kinds of cross currents, nothing momentous, nothing overwhelming, nothing flagrant, just wear and tear. If there had been some direct challenge, a clear-cut issue, I would have fought it to the end and beyond. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of God, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather and in foul, in good times or in tempest, in days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, I may not forget that which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. And so there we have it. We have this amazing quote from Howard Thurman, who talks about that when we decide that we want to live a principled life, when we decide that these principles are the principles that we choose to live by, that in the moment when we hear it, when we hear that resounding, yes, this is what I believe, this is how I want to live, this is what I want to see out in the world, we know it with our whole body temple. Everything in us stands behind it. And then life happens. And then hurt happens. And then pain happens. And somehow we drift away. And somehow our attention gets diverted. And somehow we begin to get involved in the messiness of life. And we forget that high resolve, that highest knowing about how life is always working for us. So in these days where we are seemingly feeling the pressure from life from almost all fronts, we need to keep before us the moments of our high resolve. We need to remember what it is we said we're committed to, that we're committed to creating a world that works for everyone. And that commitment requires that we use the power of our principle, the power of our innate wholeness and love and divinity to stand tall and to look through the eyes of truth, to call a lie, to name a thing, and to stand true in our high resolve to be principled individuals. And so that's who we are. That's who we are. We're whole, perfect, and complete. And sometimes we don't express at that level of wholeness. We don't express at that level of perfection, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means we've forgotten. And so we continue to bring ourselves back to the highest ideal we have for life in each other and ourselves. We continue to do the work of being change agents for positive and for a positive world that we want to experience, and remembering not only who we are, but who we came here to be. So that's my charge for you this week, to continue to keep present your moments of high resolve and to choose what it is you stand for. Not so that you can stand against anything else, but that you can stand in the light of that truth, and that truth is so brilliant that it dissolves anything unlike it. Not to obliterate it, but to include it, to bring it forth, to see what gifts are hidden so that you can be part of the solution. You can be part of bringing this beautiful vision to the world. Thank you very much. So let's go ahead and go into prayer, shall we? I invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze if that's comfortable. And to feel your breath, knowing that the breath is the representation of that beautiful spirit that is always breathing us. And I know for each one that we remember, we recall our moments of high resolve. We recall those places where we have said, yes, this is the truth. This is what I believe in. This is what I want to experience. And this is who I want to be. And we simply remember who we are. And I know it is in this remembering that we tap into true power. It is not a power that comes from outside of us. It is a power that comes from that wellspring within that can never be diminished, can never be harmed, can never go away, a flame that never goes out. And so I know for each one of us that as we walk out these crazy days out in the world, as we see the things out there that don't seem to reflect our high resolve, I know for each one that we ask that beautiful question, what would love do? And we allow ourselves to move from that purest place within ourselves, whether it is a conversation or an action. We allow ourselves to be so inclusive that even the things that grate us, even the things that trigger us, we find the gift in them as well. We stay curious and we allow ourselves to be that place where God shows up, where love is transformative and where the world is changed one moment at a time. It is with an open and grateful heart that I know this highest truth for each one of us, and that we are indeed changing the world one person at a time. I release these words, knowing that it is the action of the law that carries them forward, that I am never doing this work by myself, but that I am completely supported by that divine power and presence that lives within me. And so I simply remember and I let go. And together we say, and so it is. Thank you very much.